I'm Anita Huberman. I'm CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade, and welcome to this Business Roundtable with Todd Stone. And he is the ministerial critic, the shadow minister for the Ministry of Economic Recovery, Innovation, and Jobs. And we'll hear from Todd very shortly. Our roundtables are different from our huge town halls that we have to ensure that we have direct dialogue with those speakers that we interface with. And certainly I'll be going around the session, the Zoom session, to ensure that everyone has a chance to ask a question or indicate a comment related to BC's economy. And I ask you to be respectful in your comments. But first of all, I just wanted to acknowledge that we are on the unceded territory of our Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Kwantlen-Katzie, Semiahmoo, and Tsawwassen First Nations. The Surrey Board of Trade is Surrey's city building business organization where we attract business and bring business into the city. We're one of the top 10 largest chambers of commerce boards of trades in Canada. There's 450 of us, and all of us have been so active in terms of providing support during this pandemic, instigating change at the different levels of government, being that concierge of connections for those businesses that needed access to support or simply just needed to listen, have someone listen during this very uncertain economic road ahead of us. So ladies and gentlemen, we're going to hear from our guest speaker, and I ask you to start thinking about any questions, any comments, any feedback that you would like to give Mr. Todd Stone. So Todd, over to you for your opening remarks, please.
Great. Thank you very much, Anita. And thank you to all of you for joining us today on this, to have this important discussion about economic recovery, jobs, and innovation. And I can't think of a more dynamic city in the province at the moment where this is has such a fine point. This discussion has such a fine point on what's actually happening in your community today, and even more to the point, the potential that we all know exists in Surrey and area. I thought I would just open with a few remarks, and then we would just cut right to as many questions as possible, because I think we only have until about noon today. So I'll just start off with this. I'm here today on behalf of the official opposition in the critic role of jobs, economic recovery, and innovation. I was really pleased to serve as the opposition critic for municipal affairs and housing for 2.5 years prior to this new role. And previous to that, I was honored to serve in the government of Premier Christy Clark for 4 years. I'm a former tech CEO, and I had never run for anything before. I took the big plunge back in 2013, but I've been honored to be elected 3 times here in Kamloops, South Thompson. On behalf of my caucus colleagues, I want to just reiterate how proud we are that as an opposition over the course of the last year, we largely checked, actually all parties did in British Columbia, we checked the partisan politics at the door, and we came together to do everything we possibly could to keep British Columbians safe during this pandemic. No one could have foreseen what this pandemic would actually mean in terms of the impacts on people's lives from a health perspective and their loved ones, but also the impact on our economy, on businesses. And so I'm really proud of the fact that we worked alongside our colleagues in the other parties to support initiatives to be there for people and businesses over the course of the last year. The focus, I think, especially as we resume the legislative session next week, the focus will still predominantly be on the health and well-being of British Columbians as we grapple with whatever this second wave throws at us, and these new variants that we keep hearing that we know are in our communities now, and the potential for a third wave. And so we're going to continue to work collaboratively on those issues. The other piece, however, which increasingly we will be focusing on is the need to ensure that more is done to support business, as particularly small and medium-sized businesses in the forthcoming weeks and months. And there's really two phases that we're looking at. There's, if you talk to the Surrey Board of Trade, if you talk to the CFIB, if you talk to the chambers of commerce around the province, there's generally a consensus that we're in a resiliency phase. That's how I've heard it described by many. And really the primary focus in this resiliency phase is to ensure that that businesses, small and medium in particular, can keep their lights on, to do everything we can to make sure that they're still standing as business, going concerns in our communities in the months ahead. And so to that end, there's a tremendous amount of work that still needs to be done. Just recently, the landscape, the most current landscape that we know exists here in British Columbia, that the CFIB put these numbers out last week. While 66% of small businesses in British Columbia are open today, only 34% have what they would classify as normal sales. Only 43% are fully staffed. That paints a picture that I think has to be central to our thinking. 48% are worried about the survival of their business. They're worried that they'll actually be standing in the months ahead. 1 in 7 BC businesses are at risk of closing, and when you actually convert that into the sheer number of businesses, you're talking about 25,000 businesses across the province that employ over 300,000 people. That's a pretty significant potential risk cloud that's hanging out there on the horizon. Just today, we got the latest debt numbers, and the average debt of a small enterprise in British Columbia now is about $138,000. So that's a significant amount of debt to be carrying moving forward. But the most important figure that really resonated with me was that 63% of these businesses in British Columbia believe that government programs, so continued government supports, will be critical to their survival moving forward. So that, again, I think puts a big asterisk on the fact that we're in this resiliency period still. The jobs picture, we do hear often from the current government that the vast majority of jobs have been that were lost over the last year have been recovered, and that BC has while our unemployment rate has ticked up somewhat, we're reasonably in the middle of the pack from a national perspective, and I think the numbers are the numbers, but as the Surrey Board of Trade always does really well, you have to dive a bit deeper into those numbers to really understand what's going on from a jobs picture. I'll offer a few observations. Number one, we the latest StatsCan numbers demonstrate or illustrated that we've lost about we're still down about 41,000 jobs total in the province. From where we were in February of 2020. We are down, however, during that same period of time, we're down 83,000 jobs in the private sector. So as the BC Business Council says, and as others have said, this is we're in the middle of a private sector jobs crisis. During this last year, we have seen an increase in the total number of public sector jobs of about 41,700. And and those are not all contact tracers and health professionals, which are much needed. Obviously, we support those added positions. But the size of the public sector has grown dramatically. You just think about that, over 40,000 net new public sector jobs in the last year, while we've seen a collapse of 83,000 private sector jobs. If you go even further, you discover that a huge number of jobs that are counted as having been recovered are jobs that are only still on the books because of support programs. and most notably the federal wage subsidy program, which is the #1 program I hear about from businesses that they say, this has to continue, and it has to continue well into the future. If you were to take a program like that away, you would see a significant increase in additional lost jobs or layoffs across many sectors. And the third piece I would say is obviously, as everyone here knows, we've seen job impacts vary greatly from one industry to the next. Obviously, tourism has been decimated. The restaurant hospitality sector has been hit really hard. If you're in forestry right now, up in the interior, they're actually reopening mills. The rise in commodity prices is driving a pretty strong jobs picture in forestry. So tourism, has managed to largely recover, which is great. The last piece I would say about the jobs picture would be this. Some British Columbians have been much more disproportionately impacted during this pandemic than others. Women, in particular, youth, and minorities, people of color in this province have had much greater job losses than the broader population. These latest Stats Can numbers reflected that youth age 15 to 24 youth positions for youth are down 23,300 compared to this to a year ago. Women have lost 7,500 jobs since November of last year alone. So women actually are continuing to see jobs being stripped away. So there's I guess at the end of the day, the summary of this would be we have got to do more to foster a strong private sector jobs recovery, and we have to make sure that recovery doesn't lose sight of the fact that it must be as inclusive as possible. Part of the focus that we have been really keyed in on as an opposition over the last number of months has been on urging the government to fix those limited recovery programs that do exist in British Columbia for businesses. I mean, let's be honest, the vast majority of supports that have been rolled out for business have been federal in nature. And the provincial government has tended to, if anything, tag a few pieces on. But the one program, or the first program they came out with that was purely a BC initiative was the BC Recovery Grant for small and medium enterprises. I think everyone on this call would know that this program has been an unmitigated disaster. The funds were approved in March of 2020. The program was launched a week before the provincial election in September. And here we are, coming in on the end of February, and by my latest count, according to the minister, you're at about maybe 30 million of the $300 million in this fund are actually out the door. Now, it's no surprise what's going on here. Businesses loud and clear have been saying the eligibility criteria is far too restrictive. Yes, the jobs minister did make some changes to the eligibility criteria in December. It wasn't good enough. We're 2 months since that point, and we're still at about 10% of the funds out the door. So we're calling for further loosening of those eligibility requirements. The application process continues to be too cumbersome. Most of the data that government's asking for from businesses, government already has. We're saying that the goal here should be that the applications that are submitted should be processed in days, not weeks. We're also concerned that the program is still set to expire on March 31st. And yes, I've been in cabinet and on the government side I understand how provincial budgets work and whatnot. There are accounting, realities and so forth. But at the end of the day, the government of British Columbia has the wherewithal, and I'm certain the creativity, the capability of being creative here to at least signal to the small and medium businesses out there that this program will continue in some fashion beyond March 31st. And every single penny of that $300 million must be made available for businesses to access, those businesses that really need it. as we move beyond resiliency and into the next period, which again we think we all business people do it really well. I'm a former business owner, and many of you are business owners, if not all of you, and so we know how to walk and chew gum. It's pretty critical on a day-to-day basis to to be able to stay in business. We think the government needs to increasingly have an eye on the future here. What are the initiatives that we can actually focus on today, tax-wise, regulatory-wise, and other, that would actually ensure that as we come out of this pandemic, after having done everything we can to support business survive the pandemic, where are those opportunities to come out of this pandemic stronger than ever, to position British Columbia to be as competitive as we possibly can be, to be an attractive jurisdiction once again for investment. What are all those things that we can and should be talking about now and doing now to make that happen? Well, a lot of it's about tax competitiveness. A lot of it's about a regulatory burden. A lot of it's about investing in innovation, and we can and should talk about the strategic investment fund that the provincial government has indicated is going to be rolled out soon. That's $500 million. There's some opportunity there. There's, I think, some valid questions that need to be asked about that. The infrastructure is a hugely important a facet of our economic recovery moving forward. We're certainly seeing schools and hospitals and so forth being built around the province, and that's important. We want to see a doubling down of this government's commitment to accelerating rapid transit investments, particularly in Surrey. We want to see an acceleration of a plan for the George Massey fiasco. As the former minister responsible for that project, I'd love to. I'm always happy to talk about what we had on the table. We want to see increased investments in our ports and all of that infrastructure that's critical to the movement of people and goods efficiently around the Lower Mainland. I think the point I'll end on is, I think we all have an obligation to support our local businesses, promote local, and there's a whole bunch of things that are happening on that front, which we welcome. There is more that we can do. I mean, every government dollar and program that that's put out there, that's tax dollars, is going to go so far, but ultimately it comes down to each of us as British Columbians to do everything we can to support local enterprises. If there's companies that have done exceptionally well through this pandemic, it's the Amazons, the Walmarts, the Costcos, and it breaks your heart when you walk through many community centers and you see boarded up shops, boutiques and small, restaurants and businesses that were there for, in many cases, decades, that weren't able to make it, or many that are just barely hanging on. So we've got to make sure that everything that we do as policy decision makers is focused foremost on doing all we can to support those businesses, not just the owners of the businesses, but as importantly the employees that they have, the hundreds of thousands of British Columbians that work for these small and medium-sized businesses. So Anita, I'll end there. Hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavor of kind of where we're at as an opposition. I guess the one other piece is we are in the early stages of a leadership race for our party. So we have an interim leader of the opposition, as everyone knows, and that's Shirley Bond. I'm very proud of the work that she's doing in a very short period of time. She's rallied the troops and our smaller caucus. I'm not happy that it's smaller, but it is what it is. That's why we have elections. It's a smaller caucus. We are firing on all cylinders. It's a good group of people, and we're looking forward to working with the Surrey Board of Trade and everyone more broadly in the business community to make sure that we get these policy initiatives right moving forward. It's an important function or important role of the official opposition. We have a lot riding on it as a province. So I'll end there. Thanks, Anita.
Thank you so much, Todd. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to take down some notes as all of the attendees indicate their comments. and then you can respond at the end, just to ensure that everyone has a chance to speak. I'll speak at the end because I have a list of items as well. But first we'll go to our board chair for the Surrey Board of Trade, Mr. Doug Tennant, and then after that, Carrie Jothan. Doug, over to you.
Yeah, hi Todd. Thanks for coming, and hello to everyone else. I don't have too many comments or questions. I just wanted to point out the connectivity between housing and employment. And in Surrey, we are certainly starting to see with our employees from my organization that they are having a difficult time living where they're actually working and moving further and further up in the valley. And I'm just a bit worried that Surrey will turn into similar to Vancouver, where you can't actually live and work in the same place. And I think once COVID is over and interest rates start to rise, it's going to be a real issue that's tied to employment. So I'll look forward to your comments on that after everyone else has talked. Thank you.
Carrie, and then Greg Muirhead.
Thanks, Anita. Thank you, Minister. Good to see you and hear you. I'm Carrie Jothan, Principal of Human Capital Strategies and a member of the Board of Directors of the Surrey Board of Trade. You mentioned major infrastructure projects, and I think you might have used the fiasco in the case of one. I wondered what your thoughts were and whether you're bringing any pressure to bear on one aspect of those kind of projects. Of course, jobs is very important, and the model that the BC government is using is quite a restrictive one with the community benefits agreements and basically closed shop and union-only workforces. Is there anything you're doing on that front to try to get that model changed and be more flexible and fair?
It's certainly the community benefit agreement requirement that the government first imposed on major highway projects, and actually they're in my backyard up here near Kamloops, have had the effect of escalating the cost of a said project. The four-laning Trans-Canada four-laning project just east of Kamloops, for example, it's Chase West to Jade Mountain is what it's called, has seen a 30% cost escalation. The cost escalations on 4 different segments of the Trans-Canada between Kamloops and the Alberta border, all of which I was proud to move through Treasury Board as the Minister of Transportation at the time, and was proud to secure federal funding agreements. Though each of those 4 projects have increased in cost between 15% and 13% and the 30% example that I just cited. Now, the government is very good at the slogan here. It's hard to argue with community, the phrase community benefits. I would point out that as the former highways minister, when it comes to local employment on the Trans-Canada projects east of Kamloops here, we had more people in the local area, more people from local contractors working on the projects than there are there now. Secondly, we had a record 25% of all employment on those projects were Indigenous peoples from area First Nations. And we had a record number of women that were working on the projects. This was all done through a completely open tendering process. Whether you were a non-union or a union firm, everybody was busy. Everybody had projects. We are obviously very much opposed to this community benefits framework. We think it not only just it adds cost to projects, which means and I'll put it in dollar terms for you. The cost escalation on all of the projects between Kamloops and the Alberta border, the cost escalation is now north of about $200 million. $200 million would fund the entire capital plan for the school district here in Kamloops over the next 15 years. we have a hospital tower going up in Kamloops right now, which is a $250 million hospital tower. You'd be almost able to fund that entire hospital tower in some other community around the province, perhaps in Surrey. So when you actually convert the total financial impact of this community benefit agreement into terms that people understand, it eliminates this many portables in Surrey, or it can build this many patient care towers in communities. I think people will understand. It's also highly discriminatory, requiring people to join a union in order to work on a project. And last but not least, I'm deeply offended, as are workers, at the requirement that you can't work on a project if your residential address isn't within 100 kilometers of the project. That's just ridiculous. And I think we're going to find that as more and more of these infrastructure projects come on stream, the labor shortage, which is already a challenge, is just going to continue to get worse and worse if we have these kinds of artificial barriers put on top of projects.
So just a reminder, we're going to let everyone speak, and then Todd, you can respond at the end.
I got it. My bad.
That's okay. Greg Muirhead, and then we'll go to Gary from the Delta Chamber.
Actually, I won't really add a question to it. I'm just happy to see that you're there and you're holding the other team to task, because a lot of good promises, and glad to make sure that someone's there to say, hey, listen, what are you doing about this? So keep it up.
Thank you, Greg. Gary, and then Dave Hare.
Hi, Todd. Good to see you. So my question is, all these government support programs are great and obviously very well, definitely needed for a lot of our small businesses and Main Street businesses, but recovery is not going to really start until we start opening up the economy again and getting this, pandemic under control. So my question is, as the opposition, who's keeping the government to task on the public health orders and making sure that the public health orders are appropriate for the situation that we're in, and ensuring that that we start freeing things up as soon as we possibly can, and making sure, obviously, that we're protecting the vulnerable, but making sure that we're taking the right steps and the quickest steps towards reopening our economy.
Thank you, Gary. Dave, and then Jack Middleton.
Yeah, thank you very much, Todd, for coming over. Todd, I just want to say myself being involved with the DNA Solutions and my wife with the commercial and residential mortgages. One thing we've seen in Surrey is in last 1 year since the COVID, basically since last March, we have seen the housing prices of detached houses go up somewhere from 20 to 35%. And most of the people who are making higher than middle income, their jobs are fine. They're still qualifying for the mortgage. Some of them are making more money than before, right? It's the people under the middle income who are having more difficult time and to find jobs or finding housing. And other one I heard about is that most students who are finishing the universities, they can't get any jobs. They say, look, they work on it every day. Some of them working 8, 10, 12 hours a day, sending out their resumes, but don't hear anything about it, right? There's very few jobs, because when we talk about recovery, it is some of those people who are falling through the cracks. And the most businesses I talk to, almost 50% are afraid they might not be around for a year, even if they open, right? And so I hope you hold the government accountable, even like a Portola Bridge, the NDP promised after the last election. It's only 4 lane. It's replacing what was there for decades. And what we need is a really 6-lane bridge, because population in Surrey is growing, like it will be larger than Vancouver in the next 15 years or so, right? And those are some of the issues that you have to hold accountable government to. And some of the people in forestry, when I talked to them, they said the stumpage is what they worry about, because the prices of lumber had gone up. So when they're starting the logging, hopefully stumpage will reflect it, because high prices are not going to stay there forever, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Jack Middleton, and then we'll go to Stephen Pettigrew.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, Todd. I'm from the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. For anybody on here, we're a member of the Board of Trade. I just wanted to first start with the fact that a number of the major projects that your government had advocated for and passed are now under construction, and those are actually creating jobs all over the province in small communities, and whether that's local businesses or hotels and those sorts of things. We're seeing those things under places that would have been stressed otherwise, actually finding kind of mini booms along the pipeline routes, whether it's TMX or the Coastal GasLink pipeline. Wearing sort of a different hat here from the, I've recently joined the BC Schizophrenia Society as a board member. One of the things that I've seen from the current government is more restrictive lobbying rules around what you have to declare, what you have to talk about. And one of those specific things is that they've asked anybody who's lobbying to declare funding from any source, from any government source. And I don't think it's clear to many people that that includes things like the federal wage subsidy. And if you haven't declared that, you can be in violation of the legislation. And I think what I would just say there is that it's the little things. That's obviously with a not-for-profit, with CAP, we have a fairly sizable legal team. We can handle these kind of things, but when you're a small business, you can't deal with that. And I know that I'm sure that's a common issue around the board for these kind of things. These things stack up. You're asking somebody to spend their time learning about the lobbying rules and those sorts of things. I think it's an undue burden for them. So I just share that with you, and thank you very much for your time.
Stephen Pettigrew, and then Ilya Goldman.
There you go. Good morning, everybody. Stephen Pettigrew from the city of Surrey. And I was curious, what is going on in blockchain? This is something that I don't hear a whole lot mentioned. So what is the provincial government doing? What is the opposition doing? What are your plans? What are any plans to be able to further the blockchain technology, to be able to make sure that Surrey, hopefully, but we don't lose that, and we don't that technology doesn't leave us. We have an opportunity here to make this a really strong hub for this technology and for the future of this particular technology. And I just would really like this to be encouraged by the provincial government to be able to, so just an update, what's going on, what are the future plans for this? Thank you.
Thank you, Ilya, and then Ryan Grant. Just need to.
Thank you, Todd. I greatly enjoyed your speech, and honestly, I don't really have any questions at this moment. It was just very interesting to get insight in the policies and how the government reacts to those things and how opposition feels about it. So no questions at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Ryan Grant, and then Lydia Elder, if you have anything.
Yes, okay. Hi, Todd. So my question, the BC NDP is obviously in power right now, and that makes them the final group that gets to decide our legislation. And they're often very hostile towards business. And I'm wondering, with the BC Liberals in opposition, to what extent can they influence legislation, and can they prevent the anti-business lurch the NDP tends to move towards?
Lydia? And then Linda Annis.
Great, thanks so much. I'd just like to ask a bit more about your thoughts on next steps for vaccine distribution, and if there are any comments that the opposition has in terms of moving the government forward for the vaccine distribution at this point in time, as we've definitely heard from so many businesses that the key for employee and consumer confidence is ensuring the vaccines distribution as quickly and effectively as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. Linda Annis, and then Stephanie, if you have any comments. Linda?
Thank you, Anita. Sorry, I'm just having a little issues with some of my technology at the moment, so my apologies. I just wanted to say what a great presentation, and thank you, Todd, for taking the time to come and spend time with the Surrey Board of Trade today. Your insight has been very, very helpful. And I have no questions at this point in time.
Okay, no comments from Stephanie, but Stephanie Cadu is an MLA in South Surrey. Thank you so much for joining us. And Katie Openshaw.
Hi, I don't have any questions, but I did want to say thank you for the opportunity to participate today. I'm new in the government relations position at KPU, so these small events provide me with a great opportunity to hear more of what's going on in Surrey and hear more of the government as well, which just helps me bring that back to the university. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Katie. And just some comments from the Surrey Board of Trade. So Jasrup, if you can go first, and then I'll go.
Thank you, Anita, and thank you so much, Todd, for joining us today and everyone here. I really appreciate you making the time to come out. So I'm just going to comment on a few of the policies that the Surrey Board of Trade has and is working on, has been working on for the past year since the pandemic started. We noticed that there's not a lot of businesses that understand how to import and how to export or sell online. And selling online, importing and exporting has become fundamental for many businesses as they've had to close down shop and move to online sales. We noticed that the BC government, the NDP government, was consulting on living wage, and I wanted to inform you about our policy, which is to tie any minimum wage or wage hikes to CPI and to only tie it to those businesses that can afford to provide raises. We also have a policy on the Fraser River, which is one of the most important bodies of water that connects all of BC together, and wanted to reiterate the importance in investing in revitalization of the waterfronts there. It'll lead to job opportunities, it'll lead to economic growth, resiliency, as well as ensuring that the tourism sector is supported by revitalizing the waterfronts there. We also noticed that there's a need for a comprehensive source of information linking training programs to skills and finally to jobs. Right now, there's so much information out there, so many programs that there's no real database that people can access to understand what a certain job requires, what skills a certain job requires, and what institution or program provides that skill training. We also wanted to enhance Canada's cannabis rating. Currently, there's a lot of gaps in supply and demand, and it's not really impacting the gray or illegal markets as much as it could. And there's definitely some work that needs to be done in that regard. In regards to reopening the border with the US, our largest trading partner, we need to have a concrete plan on what's going to happen with the border opening. When is it going to happen? What are the parameters that are required? Is there potential for another shutdown? We also think that it's prudent right now to create a Canada-US Relations Committee, and this committee would report to the different levels of government at the federal and provincial level on what the US is doing, what their policies are, how are their policies impacting Canadian interests, values, and jobs, and the economy in general. And in addition to that, there needs to be more work on pre-clearance to get goods and people across the borders as quickly and efficiently as possible. Goods right now, not so much people, but once the border does open up, whenever that does happen, efficiency will be key to boosting our economies for sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasrup. And Todd, I just put my items, just in the interest of time, in the chat function. Certainly, as you know, Surrey is going to be the largest city in British Columbia very soon. We need investments in infrastructure within Surrey and the South Fraser Economic Region. And as you said, we need to start thinking about the future past the pandemic. So interested in your thoughts about trade enabling services and infrastructure in Surrey and south of the Fraser. Everything seems to be in Vancouver. The current government is investing only in Vancouver services, and Surrey people, south of the Fraser people, we're tired of going into Vancouver for everything. So just wondering, as it relates to trade, the Cascadia Economic Corridor, we're a border city, leveraging those partnerships as an engine ingredient towards economic recovery. Arts and culture investments, your thoughts on that? We're asking the provincial government for a comprehensive review of all of their taxes. There is such a bottom line impact on all of the taxes. And we're asking the Canadian government for the same. Investments in our health tech manufacturing facilities. We have the greatest number of manufacturers in British Columbia, thriving health and tech district. Removing interprovincial barriers, partnerships with Indigenous communities, role of universities in economic recovery, and of course, as you mentioned, skill shortages. So now over to you. You have 15 minutes.
Well, that is an awesome list of topics. So I'll do my best to touch on all of it, or as much of it as I can. So housing was mentioned a couple times. I think housing and housing affordability in particular is going to continue to be one of the dominant issues moving forward. It's the numbers that Dave mentioned in terms of the increased cost of or the rise in values of housing in Surrey is indicative of what's happening across the province. It's happening here in Kamloops as well. I think there's been a province-wide, I think it's about a 16 to 17% increase in the cost of housing or the value of homes in 1 year. And everyone thought it would go the other way, particularly during a pandemic. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done on housing supply. I know the Surrey Board of Trade has been a strong, unwavering advocate of a range of initiatives to drive more supply faster. A lot of it has to do with costs. A lot of it has to do with approvals and processing times. A lot of it has to do with having the courage, I think, to work with local governments on rethinking our the entire official community plan public hearing process. I just think there's a tremendous amount of work required there. So we're going to continue to press on the housing file and a wide range of related issues, recognizing that housing, transportation, childcare, and so forth, are increasingly linked to places of employment, particularly now when you consider the huge percentage of people that are working at home. And while a lot of those people will eventually migrate back to a traditional office setting, there's a heck of a lot of people that won't. I've heard from businesses that many businesses have said they're just not going to make it a requirement moving forward. They've kind of made this change. They've adapted to this home reality for a certain percentage of their employees, and there's no turning back. So that'll be interesting. Carrie's comment about the community benefit agreements, I think I've touched on that. The public health orders and accountability around public health orders. I think Gary mentioned this. Believe me, we are increasingly, as an opposition, are increasingly challenging a range of decisions or initiatives that relate to the health side of the management of the pandemic. We have been very vocal for months now on the need for rapid testing to be used in long-term care settings and in schools. We've been very consistent in calling for a detailed vaccination rollout plan. In fact, British Columbia is now the only province out of all 10 that hasn't published those details. Now, the government points to the public health, provincial health officers, a CDC plan, but what people are looking for, what they need, what they deserve are details. What does that schedule look like? What does it mean for my business? When am I going to be able to have myself and my employees access the vaccine? Where are they going to access it? Can I make an appointment now? How am I going to make appointments? Who's actually going to be responsible for the rollout of the vaccines? It was good to hear the other day from Bonnie Henry that the rollout plan is going to include not just it's not just going to be done by doctors or nurses. It's going to also be done by a wide range of other healthcare professionals and pharmacists and so forth. But again, we hear all of this stuff anecdotally in a Q&A kind of environment that Bonnie Henry does a couple times a week, and that's frankly just not good enough. So we're going to continue to press on the accountabilities there, and believe me, the need to focus on the economic recovery side of this equation is just going to continue to ramp up. It's not going to just magically go away. Likewise, we have a massive mental health and addictions issue or challenge in this province that has gotten way worse over the last year than anyone could have ever imagined. And simply applying band-aids around the edges is not going to make much of a difference. We are all seeing what's happening in our downtowns, in our community centers, and that's a lot about small businesses too. In addition to having to figure out how do they meet payroll, how do they recover from a 60 or 70% revenue drop, how do they keep their their employees engaged to begin with. How do they bring customers back into their stores and with customers feeling confident to actually go back into the workplace? But now, on top of all that, I also have to figure out how I also need to try and understand if there's light at the end of the tunnel insofar as government meaningfully stepping forward and assisting with the very significant challenges of mental health and addiction, which are right on my doorstep as a business owner. And that's a very real challenge. So we're going to continue on that front, holding the government accountable for what they are doing, what they're not doing, both on the health side and the economic recovery side. You can't have one. You can't solve one without the other. They go hand in hand. A jobs plan might be a good start. An actual, detailed sector by sector jobs plan. I think this government seems to have an aversion to documenting a plan that details sector by sector all of the initiatives that are happening with timelines and measurements, so that the government can track progress over time. I mean, a pretty potent tool that's not being used. Dave mentioned about the Patello Bridge. Again, the community benefit agreement has lifted the cost of that bridge by $100 million. $100 million. I mean, $100 million that now can't go to support small business, or can't go to eliminate more portables, or can't go to beefing up law enforcement. The stumpage piece, Dave, I couldn't agree with you more. That many are referring to what's happening with forestry and frankly a number of other resource sectors as kind of where we might be on the cusp of a super cycle, where there is a pent up demand for lumber, for example, in the United States, and it's really driving the price of lumber, and so if we're not careful, we could get this sense of things are better than they really are, and this is exactly the time. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm very grateful that hundreds and hundreds of forestry workers are going back to work, so they can put food on the table for their families. That's critical, but I want them to still be working in 2 years from now and 5 years from now, and so this is exactly the time that we should be challenging ourselves as a province to figure out what kind of structural changes, including stumpage, do we need to have on the table, and do we need to be addressing, so that when we come out of this super cycle and the price of timber comes back down again, we don't see the shuttering and the curtailments and the shuttering of mills and the curtailments and the layoffs like we have become all too accustomed in this province. Small business supports, just generally, I heard that from a number of people. And what are we doing to hold the government accountable? Again, the government has only rolled out 2 programs that directly put money in the pockets of small business owners. There's the recovery grant, and there's this online e-commerce grant. The e-commerce piece, by the way, as a former tech CEO, and we sold a lot of our services online and so forth. I mean, there is a huge value to being able to do that as a business. The concerns that we expressed when the jobs minister announced this program was, number one, we're a year into the pandemic. Like, where have you been? Number two, most businesses that were going to make a shift to e-commerce did it last year, because if they hadn't, they were going to go out of business. But this program is fashioned so it's not retroactive. So that business that courageously implemented an e-commerce platform at great expense 6 months ago isn't eligible for any of the funding that's available in this program. And thirdly, there's a whole bunch of businesses that just that for the very nature of their businesses that can't sell in an online platform, but they are having trouble keeping their lights on for other reasons. Back to the recovery grant, why would you not fix the big $300 million grant program first and worry about these other more boutique grants at some later date? So we're going to continue to shine a bright light on those programs. We want them to work, by the way. Like this, we don't celebrate the government's failures. It's not something that feels good. I would much rather be solving problems and bringing solutions to the table, and that's what we're trying to do here. Hopefully, the jobs minister takes more of our advice on that front. Major investments, Jack, absolutely right, and I put a fine point on it. BC Business Council did some really good analysis recently that showed in 2019, British Columbia's GDP growth was 2.7%. Would have been 1.7% or less if we hadn't had those 5 major investments, 5 major projects coming on stream. So everything from the Coastal Gas Link to LNG Canada to Trans Mountain and so forth. If those projects hadn't been coming on, our GDP would have been 1% less. That's billions of dollars of additional revenues that are available to invest in the services that British Columbians need. I don't think we have enough time to talk about blockchain today, but I would love to have an offline conversation with you about blockchain. There's lots going on that front. Vaccine distribution we've talked about. Some of the items that Anita raised, trade enabling infrastructure. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, the George Massey Tunnel is a prime example. It would be open like a year from now if it hadn't been canceled. We still don't have a comprehensive plan. If a plan came out the door tomorrow, it's going to take 3 to 5 years, probably more closer to 5 years to actually have it built and open. The region, and particularly communities south of the Fraser, can't wait that long. So absolutely, we will continue to advocate for the port infrastructure, the bridges, the roads, the rail improvements that need to happen across the Lower Mainland, including a significant focus on south of the Fraser, which you're absolutely right, has been shortchanged on this front for far too long. Tax review, really quickly, we actually had that in our platform in the recent election. Couldn't agree with you more. It's time to do a sort of a holistic review of the entire tax structure in British Columbia, insofar as its impacts on both people and businesses. And there's I think a tremendous opportunity inherent in that exercise to do it through the lens of competitiveness. How do we position our province to be as competitive as we possibly can on the world stage? Because if we don't think that countries in Europe and the United States and South America and the Asia Pacific aren't sharpening their pencils and figuring out how they're going to come roaring out of this pandemic to land investment in their countries as a key strategy for economic recovery, we're kidding ourselves. So we got to get serious about that as well. Health and the technology cluster that exists. It's one of the most exciting things to me about Surrey, actually, is what has already happened, but more importantly, what the potential is there. And so that's where I think the the kinds of tax changes that we're calling for, the additional work that needs to be done on training and the recruitment of people, growing people in BC, but attracting talent, attracting investment, is all going to be critical to really juicing that healthcare and technology sector in Surrey. So I think there might have been a few things that I missed there. The critical importance of working with or making central to our economic recovery reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. Our caucus supported the UNDRIP legislation, but we did so on the basis of the government coming out with a roadmap that would in consultation with First Nations, local governments, business community, the public generally, that would basically say, this is how it's going to be implemented. These are what the implications are going to be. This, if business needs anything beyond tax considerations and fair regulation, it's certainty. And we don't have a heck of a lot of certainty across many sectors these days. In part because the government hasn't followed through on its commitment to provide that roadmap on the implementation impacts of the UNDRIP legislation. So we'll be calling for that moving forward, as well as pay equity. One of your MLAs, Stephanie Cadieux, is likely going to reintroduce her bill on requiring the publishing of gender pay equity gaps between men and women. That's critically important. We want to see the accessibility legislation come forward this March, April, because that's critically important. And I've spoken to the importance of Indigenous reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. So this has been fun and very much appreciated. I really thank you for the opportunity, Anita, and all of you.
Todd, thank you so much. We focus on so many diverse issues, and it's always a bit of a workout with these sessions. But just wanted to mention also for your team to consider a focus on arts and culture investments. They enhance the livability of all of our cities, and certainly from a city design principle. They have been compromised during this pandemic and certainly need support in that regard. So Todd, thank you so much as always for being accessible to us. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending. And remember, Surrey is an opportunity city.